Hi, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for joining us for the second episode of Disclosures Through Dialogue, presented by Filo Sofi Arts. My name is Gabrielle Aruta. I'm the owner and director of Filo Sofi Arts. We are a contemporary art gallery based in New York City, and we're also an education space dedicated to the advancement of philosophical practice in everyday life. We do that by engaging artists and other fine art professionals in philosophical dialogue about their work and practice. Tonight, we are spotlighting the art of Blake Hiltunen. We're going to look at some of his sculptures, both cement busts and bronze mirrors, as well as some of the unique practices that he has developed to create his work. Tonight, joining us is curator Kourosh Mahboubian and philosopher Donovan Irven, in addition to artist Blake Hiltunen. We're gonna first throw it to my dog, who wants her ball. But after that, we're gonna throw it to Kourosh Mahboubian, whose recent show, Forget What You Know, featured the sculpture of Blake Hiltunen. So Kourosh, could you tell us a little bit about yourself and the artist Blake?
Absolutely. I want a ball too. I am Kourosh Mahboubian. I am an art dealer and advisor. It's also probably helpful to know that I was raised in a family of archaeologists and art dealers specializing in ancient Near Eastern art and antiquities. So antiquities and ancient art always feature prominently in my aesthetic sense. The first time I walked into Blake's studio a couple of years ago during a Bushwick Open Studio tour, I was immediately struck by a chord of familiarity. I looked around and saw these incredibly beautiful cement busts and other cement sculptures, as well as live sculptures with bees eating away at sugar sculptures, and finally some mirrors that had been distorted and seemed to be melting. So beginning with the cement busts, and you can see one of them right here, these started out, you look at them and you immediately recognize classical antiquity, and yet I was struck by how familiar it felt, because it does in fact seem to be ruined by time. There's decay, there is a sense of erosion, and something that is no longer what it once used to be. As I looked around, I was struck by the beauty in not just the nature of the sculpture, but the idea behind it, that there is beauty in both the form itself and then in this sense of decay that was being portrayed behind it. One of the things that I started to understand about Blake's work is that he begins with creating something beautiful. And then there is a transformation that takes us into a little bit of destruction and erosion, and he will explain his process, a reverse lost wax process with the cement to create this feeling in his sculptures. But then there is finally this sense of rebirth. In the case of the busts, they really look as though this is something beautiful that has gone through a great calamity, perhaps some kind of Armageddon, or really the immediate thing that you might think of as Pompeii. In the case of his mirrors, which were included, his busts and mirrors, I should say, were included in my show, Forget What You Know, that closed recently. These remind you immediately of Salvador Dali's Melting Clocks, far more beautiful in my opinion, but that's a personal choice. But the fact is that we look at them and we see something that was once very much Rococo and that is now destroyed, and in its destruction, even better. And then finally, the concept of rebirth that exists in much of his work. So as we see the beauty, the erosion, the decay, we're left with a sense of hope and of something better coming next. With that said, no one can explain it better than Blake himself. So I'm going to introduce Blake Hiltunen. Blake, would you tell us a little, please, about your early inspirations and what leads you to make these sculptures?
Yeah, sure. I guess the place to start is a moment that I decided that I wanted to be a sculptor. I had already kind of decided early on in my life that creating art and pursuing a life in the creative field was what I wanted to do. But in high school, I was taking a ceramics class, and they had a beautiful poster of the 𝘋𝘪𝘅 hanging in the classroom, not dissimilar from the image you see on the left. And it was the first time I had seen it, and I was totally astounded by first the ability of Michelangelo to portray something that's so soft, so fleshy, so human in a material like stone, but also in this conversation of life and death. And in the Vatican, this piece is set against a background of stone that also infuses a life and a flesh to that white marble. It seems to me that life in general is just this kind of pursuit against dying, and sort of against this idea of destruction, entropy, and so I felt like there was this excitement in me of sculpture being able to combat that. Another thing that influences me very much so is I grew up in a home of dental of a dentist and a dental hygienist, and so we had these dental journals kicking around the house that would have photos of decaying mouths, of teeth that were totally upset by different diseases and that sort of thing. So there was this other influence of this fleshy decay. Here you could see a figure from Pompeii. These were cast from an archaeologist who discovered that through excavation, there were these hollow voids where the pyroclastic flow had obliterated the human form but left a negative void. And ultimately what they were molds of those human figures. So he decided to pump plaster into these negative voids, and in so doing was able to capture these victims in their final moments. And you can see that in this case, the skull and the teeth are still exposed, and that gets back to this idea of kind of the mouth and decay. So much of sculpture actually is about, or has been about in its history, trying to combat this existential threat of death. Funerary monuments are our way of saying I was here, of creating something that will live longer than your flesh and bone. And yet still, especially within limestone or in marble, acetic acids from rains will deteriorate, and ultimately these things will return to the earth in the same way that we will ultimately end up there. After seeing the 𝘋𝘪𝘅, it was a dream of mine to go to Italy and study there, which I did in 2007. And in living in Florence and being around all of these classical antiquities, it just further deepened this appreciation for the Renaissance for sculpture specifically, and for time in general. Knowing that Florence is such an ancient city it was extremely influential because it's older than the United States. And I had never been confronted with an age of civilization in that way before.
Blake, thank you so much for taking us on that little journey, visual journey through some of the experiences that you've had in life that have shaped you as an artist. I certainly have never encountered someone with that same combination of interests and personal history to bring them to artistic practice. And you've given us a lot to chew on, not to play with the teeth analogy, but we're a punny group. But decay is an important concept that is in your work and certainly has a lot of philosophical heft to it. Donovan, would you contribute to our conversation now and frame a little bit of what Blake's work is like from a philosophical perspective?
Sure. Thanks, Gabrielle. I think Blake and Kourosh have both done a good job of talking about the interplay between decay and beauty, and decay opening a space of possibility. And I think that that's something that comes really clearly in the sculpture. Particularly, you can look at these, and I think maybe we jump to decay, that they're falling apart, but I think they can also be read the other way as formation, that there's something coming out of like a core or a central figure. And so there's this, again, an interplay or a tension between, is this falling apart? Is it forming? Is there something being exposed or coming forth from underneath? Even in the process of their creation, you can see here is where the wax is melting, and this is one of the things that will create some of those almost geological fissures and caverns in the sculpture. And the destruction and the distortion of the wax is creating the negative space in the sculpture. So even through their process, that play of decay and creation, of beauty and an almost sort of grotesque or morbid view toward death is happening in tension with one another. And I think that that's what makes the sculptures really arresting, because when you see them, you're kind of like, oh, wait a second, like what's going on here? And it throws you into that space of trying to like fit it into something, fit it into a category that might not come immediately to you. So that makes them, of course, really interesting to look at and talk about. Thus also, go ahead, I'm sorry.
Just for a second. So I don't think we have mentioned Blake's interest and hobby and activity as a beekeeper. And maybe while we're on this slide for a moment, Blake, if you could share a little bit about that with us and how it's then relevant to what exactly we're looking at here and how that plays into your practice.
Sure. I mean, I'll try and keep it brief because that's a whole other avenue. So there is a process that is called lost wax casting. It was developed by the Greeks and actually the Chinese as well, wherein you make an object in wax, you coat it in ceramic, you melt the wax out of that ceramic with obviously in a kiln or in a fire, and you're able to then pour material into that ceramic form that you can then transition whatever that wax was into a different material, typically used for like stone. I keep honeybees as it's another avenue of thought for me and another body of work. But one thing that I do with the honeybees is I harvest the wax. And I use that wax in combination with a few other materials such as rosin, which is sap that's harvested from trees, microcrystalline wax, and red foundry wax to make my own specific material for modeling the negative space that I create for casting the cement. the honeybees offer me another avenue of thought in terms of essentially like what a perfect society could be, and also this continuation of thought on life and death, of being able to harvest honey that is a food source, of pollinating flowers and creating beauty within that, and and yeah, I mean, many other things that we're not talking about, we're not focused on now. Yeah.
So thanks, Blake. It's really fascinating to see. I would have never imagined when I first saw your work that it would have involved that kind of process to create these sculptures. So thank you for revealing a little bit of the mystery behind it. So Donovan, if we can go back to you to discuss some other aspects of Blake's work and some philosophical themes beyond decay.
Yeah, so with the bust, they're usually, when you think of a classical bust, it's presenting you with the human form. When you think of a mirror, how it normally functions, you look at yourself in the mirror, it's supposed to reflect back to you. The influences from antiquity and from the Renaissance also kind of bespeak a little bit of luxury, like who's having monumental sculptures placed on their tombs and stuff, as people who have access to a little bit of wealth, and so on and so forth. So the mirrors, when you think of them by themselves, you get the reflection, which is distorted through the eruption of the mirror. So you have these really spontaneous gestures that are reshaping the frames of the mirror, disrupting their normal flow, but also adding some geometry and curvature to the mirror so that you get a distorted reality reflected back at you. And when you think of the two together, you get a sense that under the surface of this is decay, that underneath the vanity and the beauty of these monumental works and the vanity of the mirror emerges sort of like this decay. So you have a little bit of a social, political commentary as well when you think of the thematically across the two series of works.
Thanks, Donovan. Now we're going to look at some art historical references that either overtly are inspirations for Blake, or in one instance is a name that people have mentioned to Kourosh and I when we're in the gallery with the work, and they say, oh, it looks like this, and it's not something that's influenced Blake, but is, I think, of interest to show. So the first comparison is with Matthew Barney, and this is something that Blake is channeling and inspired by. So Blake, could you explain a little bit about your work here and Matthew Barney's piece?
Yeah, Matthew Barney is someone that I'm deeply interested in because of his relationship to personal narrative and mythology, but also his use of materials, and specifically his use of materials as the potential for a greater metaphor for the work, for his work. The piece on the left is his, obviously, cast bronze, and from what I understand, the way he made it was by pouring bronze directly into water, and that shape is caused by the solidifying of that bronze in the water form. So in a way, it's capturing the negative space of the water from the heat distortion that happens. The piece on the right is a work that I made in undergrad, wherein I was dripping water onto a plaster block for maybe 3 or 4 months, and it's inverted. This image is inverted, and the sculpture is shown inverted, but this is the negative cavity from that deteriorated plaster. It's the cavity that water formed. So in a way, Barney, in using the bronze and casting into water, I'm doing the opposite by using the water to generate the casting. or at least create the negative shape to make the resin casting.
Kourosh, you had some life experiences that remind you of these works.
Absolutely. I was going to bring up the fact, not necessarily about my own life experiences. I have spent some time out in the field as an explorer, but more about the pieces themselves. The places we see these kinds of formations in nature, they look very similar to the art that we just looked at, are either in caves, particularly the ones that I have known are underwater caves, but that, and also in the ice formation of polar regions. So you have a karst environment, which is basically just a limestone environment. Rain falls on the ground. The limestone that's under the first layer of dirt and so on absorbs this rain, but the rain erodes it. The water has to go through this porous rock and eventually creates holes. So that would be very much like what Blake is doing with his own work, but with the Matthew Barney work, that is much more typical of fresh water falling into, either from precipitation, falling into super chilled Arctic water. So salt water is 28.5 degrees before it freezes. Fresh water freezes at 32 degrees. So 32-degree fresh water rains or snows into the Arctic, well, it rains into the Arctic water and refreezes in those crystalline patterns, very much like Matthew Barney's work. So in one case, instead of water, it's bronze. And in the other case, instead of a karst formation, it's the negative space that Blake is using. But these are natural processes. And what we're looking at here next is even more interesting. So Blake, tell us why these natural processes, what's important to you, and explain this one in particular, which really is meaningful to me. I love it.
Yeah. Well, I think natural processes are happening all the time, and we have to deal with them. And so much of life on Earth is just dealing with gravity, for instance, just getting out of bed in the morning and why you feel tired at night. Sculpture is about that too. It's about dealing with physics and just trying to make something get up off of the ground. This piece in particular deals kind of with all of that, but in what I view as a cycle. So this, you can see on the image in the right that it's a body, an upside down figure. And on the image on the left is cut in half. It's the same sculpture in the round. The other side of it is crystallized. It's been crystallized with a material that's called potassium nitrate. Potassium nitrate I find a very interesting material because it has all of that metaphor that I was talking about before. Potassium nitrate is used as a fertilizer. It's also used to preserve meats, so sausages, for instance. It's kind of salt. And it's used in gunpowder and in ballistics missiles. All of those things, for me, fuse in this conversation of what it is to be living on Earth, of human civilization, developing agriculture, and growing foods, the preservation of meat to sustain us through the winter or through hard times. Also, this conversation of trying to live beyond death, the preservation of the body, mummification, and ultimately this kind of violence that we inflict on each other over territory and over natural resources. So that piece is really my thoughts on all of that kind of fused into one.
I've got to ask, just out of curiosity, is it flammable?
I don't believe so. I think you need to mix it with other components like aluminum and some other flammables to get it to ignite. I think it needs a reaction. Like I think it probably is flammable, but you need to get it at a specific heat to get it to combust.
As many times as we've gone through the slides practicing, it's has never struck me as much as right now the similarities between the picture of the figures from Mount Vesuvius and this figure of a human form in the fetal position, and your discussion of, I mean, I was unaware of the, you know, pumping the remains full of plaster, and, you know, to see the inside of the body, what you have made occur chemically inside of this structure. It's really beautiful comparison, and there's a lot of depth and nuance to this piece that, as many times as I've looked at it, from the moment that I, you know, first walked into your studio, to, you know, to continue to still be seeing it with fresh eyes through our discussion. You know, how many times have we talked about this in the last few days, and it's like, wow, it resonates. You know, this one last conversation has brought a whole other level of interest and understanding and fascination to this piece. So thanks for that.
Yeah.
Okay, so now on to Giacometti as an influence. So Blake, I'd love to hear from you, and then maybe Donovan, a little engagement afterwards.
Yeah, sure. I mean, aside from just the visual similarity that Giacometti has with my work, I'm interested in his approach to making sculpture, which was all about looking. And very often he would have to step farther and farther back from his models, so that he felt like he could see them more. And for me, I identify with that not so much in my modeling or in my like sort of like craft practice, but in the way that I'm conceptually thinking about art making and the objects that I want to make, which is by stepping back in time or stepping forward in time and trying to understand these objects as kind of future relics, or as things that have somehow come from the past to the present, but have gotten here by way of some event. Giacometti, interestingly, grew up in the Swiss hillsides, and there were very many skinny spruce trees that were there, and they really influenced his aesthetic in, for instance, all those long monumental figures that he was making. And I feel identified as well by growing up in New Hampshire and going to some different caves and not archaeological sites, geologic sites. There's a big mica mine there, and going out and being inspired by just the natural world and having this influence of trying to make things that look like they belong to the earth. And I think that I think it was Sartre wrote no, it was
Donovan, I'll tell you.
Better get it right. That's
business.
Jean Genet wrote a bit on Giacometti, and was saying that his work should be buried underground. And I feel it. I believe that too, and I also want, in a way, that my work goes there too.
Thanks.
This trying to push at the edges of our experience and our perception. I mean, I think art tries to reach this like impossible transcendent of, you're talking about it in terms of time, to like bring the past into the present, to uncover something that's there. You know, Giacometti wanted to try to capture sort of the totality, which of course, phenomenologically, you really can't. You know, it's always presented as one aspect of it, and the other sort of recedes and is invisible to you at a given time. But I think that one of the great things about conceptually about art is the way that it tries to express this impossibility. And perhaps it fails to do so in one sense, but that failure perhaps is the beauty. That's where its beauty comes from. Exactly, pushing against the limits of our perception. And here too, I mean, with this comparison with Glenn Brown's work, you have this like tension here with death, the little death, shallow deaths, but you also have somewhat religious, hopeful, upturned features. So again, you see that beauty peeking through the sort of darkness there. In addition to crossing genre, we have here a painting where you're doing it in sculpture. So we're seeing thematically across different medias as well. So I thought this was really, I've heard this is true, right? That many people have commented on this comparison when they see Blake's work in the show.
Yeah, we've had that experience before, and Glenn Brown wasn't a figure that I was well versed with either. So it's always sort of a nice thing when somebody walks in and they can see it, that transferred value across medium. But there is that sort of striking similarity between what is done through, you know, paintbrush on canvas versus this reverse, you know, the wax molding that Blake is doing here, to create that unique mark making in a completely different manner. So I like that to, you know, there's what's important to Blake, but also what is visually there for someone to bring their own experiences, and to be able to read, to that kind of to have that same sort of aesthetic experience, despite Blake being like, nope, not a part of not a part of my thought process.
Yeah.
So
People will see it differently. I also feel that even having seen the paintings next to his work, I still don't make the connection as strongly as most of the people who've commented about it do. I find that I get a different feeling from the Glenn Brown pieces than I do from Blake's pieces. Just perceptually and intrinsically, without analyzing it.
I'm fine with the comparison.
You don't mind it?
It's great.
There you go. Cool. Okay. But here's something that does speak a little closer to home for Blake. Work by Louise Bourgeois in the middle, and to the same mirror of Blake's, one without a figure sort of being distorted in it, and another to kind of see the way the light and whatever is reflected in the mirror is thrown. Blake, could you tell us a little bit about your thoughts on these works?
Yeah, the mirrors are really all about the body. I make the waxes really fast. The forms are made within 5 minutes of popping out the casting. So I have this wax form and I interject a gesture into it, whether it be tearing or pushing or ripping. Choose this form that I like. If I don't like it, I break the wax down, and I recast it. But it's really all about this relationship between gesture and action and the material. In detail, in the mirrors, in the bronzes, you can see fingerprints, handprints. You can see the evidence of the figure. Louise Bourgeois very much was interested in memory, and I was lucky enough to be in England, in London, when she was having a retrospective at the Tate. This was before I knew what the Tate was, and we were just like hanging outside of the beautiful building with some friends, and we were invited in by one of the curators who was out having a smoke break. And he brought us through the museum and showed us this insane installation of Louise's work. And it was in this moment that, again, like the Michelangelo, that I had this kind of epiphany or revelation of what what art could do and specifically what sculpture can be. And she has continued to be someone who I look at and am inspired by, and I find that this piece in particular is just spot on. It's it hits that pietà spot that that is like deep within my heart, inspiration heart.
Thank you. So now we are never successfully able to keep these to a half an hour. So, but quickly, we're going to look at some of what you're working on now. And then we're going to close with a philosophical question. So, Blake, can you tell us a little bit about what we're looking at here?
Yeah, these are unfinished bronzes. These have come back from the foundry, and I've started working on them to various degrees. The one in the bottom left-hand corner has been more polished than the others, but they're works that are still very raw, and I look to push the material a bit more with these works. So for instance, in the top left-hand corner, you can see some patina, some green patina on that, which was actually made with urine. And so looking toward putting a little bit more kind of, let's say, vulgarity into the forms, while also trying to finish them to be those kind of beautiful mirrors.
I love seeing them in this stage. That's really cool to get to view. And then what's going on here, Blake?
Yeah, this is I very much like to know as much as possible about the objects that I'm trying to make, and in making all of these mirrors, I started studying more of the history of mirror making and its cultural relevance throughout history. Came across this method of mirror making that was developed in the Han Dynasty in China, wherein they were creating something that's called a magic mirror. And that piece is, on one side, it's a completely flat reflective surface, and on the other side it's a shallow relief, and through the metal working process you can distort the metal to have a totally invisible form that will only show up when light is reflected off of it. So I'm working on this right now, and looking to scale it up to be a piece that would do something like what's going on with the skull in this Hans Holbein painting. So I'm working on a bronze mirror now that will be on a wall, that will be mounted to a wall, specifically located in a room that when the light at a specific time of year comes in, reflects off of that mirror and projects a skull that is on the back in the sunlight, either on the floor or on a neighboring wall, or whatever other architecture could be around there.
Blake, your friend Kyle is chiming in that he remembers having a phone conversation with you when you were working on this process, and he's very excited to see the finished process and understand more of what you're talking about.
Coming, baby.
That's great.
Time for a quick explanation of the Holbein painting, because I don't think everyone will understand what's going on here.
Yeah, Holbein painted this elongated skull that you can see on the floor. Is distorted, such that if you are at a very acute angle in looking at the painting, which is in the National Gallery in London, you can see the form, but you can only see it clearly if you get it from a very specific angle. So the image on the right is what you would see from that side blown up. The image in the middle with the green square is that angle that you can see the skull. And then the image on the left is what you see when you're looking at the painting face on. Okay. And that work ultimately is about wealth and life and death as well.
Great. Thanks, Blake. So many of the works that we were featuring tonight by Blake Hiltunen are for sale through Kourosh Mahboubian's exhibition, Forget What You Know. The show just came down, but the works are still available. A couple of them are gone now. And also there are future works coming. As we saw, some of these pieces just came back from the foundry. So if you are interested in purchasing a mirror or sculpture by Blake Hiltunen, please feel free to contact us at collecting@filosofiarts.com, and we can pass that information on to Kourosh and Blake. And then as we have are aiming to do with this series, Disclosures Through Dialogue, it's only a brief look at an artist's work and practice. We can't fit that much in a half an hour, or more than that in certain cases, but still it's only a small slice of their practice. So in the spirit of not being able to answer all the questions, we will leave you with a question. So Donovan, what do you have in mind here tonight for our question about Blake's work?
Yeah, I think that, art always should stick with us. And as you go and ruminate on these things, I think really to think about the relationship between beauty and decay, and the possibility or impossibility for beauty within decay, whether or not they're in a necessary relationship. Do they depend upon one another? Or is there a way in which they could be pulled or teased apart, at least logically? Those sorts of things are what we have in mind when we ask this sort of philosophical, what is the relationship between beauty and decay? So I hope you all continue to sort of think on that a little bit, and hopefully use Blake's art as a kind of reference point for those meditations.
That's great. Thank you. Kourosh, thank you for being with us tonight and for giving us the opportunity to present Blake's work in partnership with you. We have more spotlights coming up on artists that were in your recent show, Forget What You Know. So please look forward to those coming. And Blake, it has been a great pleasure to spend this time with you, looking at your work and coming to understand it more. So thank you for your role in being here this evening and in making this work and challenging our understanding of beauty and in the world. And also behind the scenes, we could not do this without Tatiana Nicholas, our Director of Communications. So Tots, big thanks to you. And so yeah. We're very pleased to be able to bring you this educational and aesthetic programming. So thanks very much, and tune in again.